Glad that you are here today. Welcome to Liberty Church. My name is David, and privileged along with my wife to be pastors here at Liberty, and so glad to be here. Awesome to see my wife in service. She's first time in a year. She's backslidden, and so we're glad to see her back here. Be praying for her, Hey, well done for being here today, giving God your Sunday. Today is the third Sunday of Lent. Lent season, as you may or may not know, is a really important season, significant season in the Christian calendar for followers of Jesus. This is a season of preparation for us as we look forward to Easter and Good Friday weekend. It's a time when we are leaning in to the stories of the days and the weeks, even the hours leading up to the death and the resurrection of Jesus. And throughout this series, we are wading in a little bit deeper. And we are challenging ourselves to find ourselves in these stories. What if you were there? How would you react, respond? And even more than that, we're challenging ourselves to ask, what if I was them? Do I see myself in the people that were there and the way that they reacted? And we're asking God to show us. God, show me how I see where I am in this story. And we're asking God, inviting Him to challenge us. What will we do about that? And I preface all of that because today's a challenging one. Today we're talking about Judas. I'm going to just tell you, this one's uncomfortable, so I hope you're in a comfortable seat. It was uncomfortable to prepare. Obviously, if I was going to preach it, I had to first put myself in this story. And it wasn't comfortable, but I will tell you that on the other side of the discomfort, I found a lot of hope, and that's my hope for you today. That you will dare to see yourself honestly, and that you will embrace and not escape the discomfort. Because I believe if you will sit there, you will find that Jesus is with you in it, that He is not mad at you, that He still loves you, and that He wants to write a brand new story in your life. Because here's the bottom line: failure is inevitable, but it doesn't have to be final. And I was going to tell you today, I am not going to tell you how not to fail in life or how not to fail God, because to be honest, I think that would be a waste of all of our time, because failure is inevitable. Instead, I'm going to tell you how not to fail disastrously. I want to talk to you about how we can fail, but how failure is not final. In fact, when we invite Jesus into our failure, we will find that failure is formational, and that your failure, even your worst failure, could be the opening line to your own great redemption story. So let's dive in today. We are going to we're going to look at all of the Gospels, but we're going to start in the Gospel of Luke. The Gospel of Luke first introduces us to Judas in the very beginning of Jesus' ministry. He tells us this. He says that Jesus, He called His disciples to Him, and among the disciples, He chose 12 of them, whom He also designated as apostles. Luke then lists all of them, and at the very end of the list, Luke says this: and Judas Iscariot, who became a traitor. Who became a traitor. Now that's likely what you've heard about Judas. He's pretty infamous. Even if you've never read the Bible or never been to church before, you probably know what a Judas is. A Judas is a traitor, a backstabber, a betrayer. But it's really significant to the story and significant to our talk today to also see that he was first called and chosen to be something else. Jesus saw something special in Judas. That when he called all his disciples together, he chose Judas, he invited him into the inner circle of the 12. To be even more than a disciple, to be an apostle. He was chosen to be one who would carry the message of Jesus, the message of the gospel to the world. But Luke tells us instead, he became a traitor. To say it one way, Judas did not live up to who he was meant to be. Has anyone ever felt like that's your story? You see, just like Judas, all of us have failed at times. We have failed. We will fail. It might look like betraying another person. It might look like betraying God's trust in you. It might be betraying your own integrity. It might look like saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing, even when you know what the right thing is. It may look like sacrificing what's good in exchange for something that's selfish, something that's not really worth it. The point is, we all make mistakes, but sometimes, if we're honest, they're not really mistakes, are they? They're choices. They're bad choices. They may be ill-informed choices. They may be, the result of bad influences. But there are decisions that we make. And most of the time, our bad decisions and our failures, they're minor things. But maybe you also know what it's like to fail in a really big way. Maybe you have screwed up relationships and hurt people. Maybe you've derailed a path that your life was on. Maybe you've done something that you can't even talk about. Something that only you and Jesus know about. But maybe you're old enough to suspect, you've lived life long enough to suspect that you're not who you were meant to be. Here's why Judas' story is so important to us. First of all, Judas' disastrous failure, it wasn't a single moment in time. It was a series of bad decisions, bad steps taken in the wrong direction. And secondly, at several points, Judas, he could have stopped. He could have changed direction. His failure, it could have been formational, not final. It could have been the beginning of his own redemption story. His story matters because we've all been Judas, but none of us have to end like him. Our worst failure, it could be the opening line to your own great redemption story. I told you today was going to be a little uncomfortable. Everybody okay? Just checking in with you. Everyone good? You with me? All right, let's dive in. The next time we see Luke mention Judas, it's way later in chapter 22. Chapter 22, Luke tells us this, that the leading priests and the teachers of the religious law were plotting how to kill Jesus. But they were afraid of the people's reaction. Then Satan entered into Judas Iscariot, who was one of the 12 disciples. And he went to the leading priests and the captains of the temple guard to discuss the best way to betray Jesus to them. They were delighted, and they promised to give him money. And so he agreed and began looking for an opportunity to betray Jesus so they could arrest him when the crowds weren't around. Now, not long after this moment was the Passover meal. Jesus gathered his disciples together to share this meal along with them. And as we heard last week, Jesus, he knew what Judas was up to, and yet he still washed Jesus' feet. He still welcomed Judas to the table. He still shared communion with him. And Judas participated in it all. He ate the bread, which symbolized Jesus' body, which was about to be broken. He drank the wine, which symbolizes the blood that Jesus was about to shed for him. All symbols of this new relationship that God was beginning with mankind through Jesus. And Judas, he participated in all of it. In other words, he didn't leave church early. He heard the whole message. He heard the invitation. He said yes. But even though he was there, Jesus could see that his heart was not right. The Gospel of John tells this same story, and he says at this point that Jesus was troubled in spirit and testified, "Very truly, I tell you, one of you is going to betray me." Now, his disciples, they stared at one another, at a loss to know which of them Jesus meant. Jesus says this, and they're stunned. Awkward silence. They're looking at each other. I've always wondered where Judas was looking in this moment. John tells us that he was there and he was sitting next to Jesus, and he leaned in and he whispered to Jesus, "Lord, who is it?" And Jesus turned to him and he whispered back so that no one else could hear. He said, "It's the one to whom I will give this piece of bread when I have dipped it in the dish." And then John tells us that dipping the piece of bread, Jesus gave it to Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot. Now, we need to catch the significance of this act, this moment right here. You see, the Passover meal, everything about the Passover meal had meaning. Every dish, every course, there was symbolism to it. And at the end of the meal here, this is after the cups and all of that, there would be sauces and spices and some meats left there in the main dish, some remnants. Any Italians? How many Italians in the house? You know that moment? Wow, not as many as I thought. All right, okay. Well, anyway, let me key you in. There's this moment at the end of every Italian meal when you take the bread. It's gluten-free for me, but it's okay. We found some good gluten-free bread. Anyway, you take the bread, and it's when you just like wipe your plate. There's no dirty plates in an Italian house. You just wipe that plate clean of all the sauce and the grated cheese and the meatballs that have fallen out of your mouth. And then you soak that up, and that last bite, that's the bite. Well, that's what's happening right here. You see, the host of the meal, he would, after the meal's done, he would take a piece of bread and he would scoop up the good stuff. But instead of eating it himself, he would give this last piece to one person at the table who he had specifically chosen to honor as an expression of deep friendship. So when Jesus takes this bread and he gives this to Judas, he was saying, "Judas, I know what's up. I know what you're about to do. But I want you to know, I love you. I still consider you my friend." What a moment. If I'm Judas, I would like to think that that would change everything for me then and there. But John tells us that as soon as Judas took the bread, Satan entered into him. Instead of being changed and softened in that moment, Judas's heart was hardened. And I think Jesus saw it all over his face. Because John tells us, so Jesus told him, "What you are about to do, do quickly." And as soon as Judas had taken the bread, he went out, and it was night. Now you probably know the rest of the story. Judas led the police to Jesus, where Jesus was praying to arrest him. They didn't even know who Jesus was, and so Judas had to point him out, and he walked up to him, and he gave him a kiss. They arrested him, and they dragged him to an illegal midnight trial where they had recruited false witnesses to accuse him of things that he hadn't done. There he was then mocked and beaten up by corrupt police. He was sentenced and condemned by corrupt judges, and then handed over to the corrupt government of Rome to complete the injustice of torturing him and humiliating him and crucifying him. This may be why a lot of moms don't name their son Judas. Judas is not someone we want to identify with. His story is not one that we like to find ourselves in. But the truth is, there is so much that we can learn from him. So today we're going to look at 5 steps that Judas took toward disastrous failure. Not so you will take them, but so that we can recognize them and avoid them. 5 steps to failing disastrously. Number 1, make your own plan without asking what God wants. Now, what was going on here, the gospel writers, they're not explicit about what Judas's motive was. I've heard people say that Judas didn't have a choice because of prophecy, that prophecy sealed his fate, but that completely misunderstands what biblical prophecy is. Prophecy tells us what God knows will happen, not what he forces to happen. This was not Judas's fate. Fate is not a Christian concept. Do we all know that? Fate is Greek mythology. God never overrides or takes away people's free will to get them to do what he wants. This was Judas's choice. He made his own decision. Now, Satan is given influential credit in the scripture, but all scholars agree that the gospel writers are not suggesting in this that Judas was possessed. Rather, it's similar to what we see Jesus say to Peter earlier on when he says, "Get behind me, Satan. You don't have in mind the things of God, but merely human concerns." In that moment, Peter wasn't controlled by Satan. He just had his own agenda. Well, it's the same with Judas. So what was Judas's agenda? Some scholars believe that Judas was a part of a group called the Sicarii. They were a violent, radical group that wanted to overthrow Rome. And so Judas might have started following Jesus because he thought that Jesus was going to be the military conquering Messiah that would start a revolution. But Jesus was dragging his feet. And so because he was dragging his feet, maybe Judas thought he could force Jesus' hand, force the action by creating a confrontation with Rome. Others think that Judas realized finally that Jesus was not going to be the conquering, violent Messiah that he wanted him to be. And so disappointed, angry, maybe even feeling betrayed himself, he turned on him and sided with his enemies. Whatever the reason, Judas's first bad decision was that he made plans without finding out and asking what God wanted. And when Jesus' plans didn't match with Judas's, Judas had a decision to either let go of his agenda or to force his own way. Have you ever found yourself in that story? Like we make plans, right? We make plans for our lives, for our careers, for our families, for our futures. And sometimes we just forget to ask what God wants. Worse, sometimes we don't want to ask. And look, it's good to have a plan. We should be making plans, but have you asked God what his plans are? Is it your plan to do God's plan? Or do you just want him to approve what you've already decided? Now, I think it's easy for me anyway to pile on to Judas here because he's Judas. But I got to admit that I get Judas here. I get wanting to take matters into my own hands when God is not doing what I want him to do. I get being angry with God and even feeling betrayed when he's not the God I want him to be. I don't know if that's too honest for you here today, but that's the truth. And the bottom line is, whenever I refuse to let go, to surrender my plan and I try to force my own way, what happens is that's when I hurt other people. That's when I move myself away from whom I'm meant to be. I disconnect from God, but I don't hurt him. Even if that's my intention, it doesn't hurt him. He doesn't stop loving me, and he never stops giving up on me. And it's true for you. Look, making plans without God, it will set you up for failure. But I want to tell you that failure is not final. We can always pause when we find out we've done that. We can recenter and we can ask God, okay, God, what do you want here? Failure is formational when we learn the lessons to seek God first for what's next. The danger lies not in us failing, but in us doubling down and then taking the next step that we see Judas take. And that's to resent correction. Now, just days before this Last Supper, there was another dinner that Jesus was at. This was a dinner that was given in Jesus' honor. And at this dinner, a woman came in and she broke open an extremely expensive jar of perfume, and she poured it out on Jesus as an expression of her love for him. Well, Jesus sees it and he loves it. He sees this as this beautiful, powerful, symbolic expression. He sees it as foreshadowing of how he was going to pour out his life, the most valuable possession on that earth. He was going to pour out his life as an expression of his love for humanity. So he's praising what she's doing. He's talking about what he's doing, and Judas doesn't see any of that going on. All Judas sees is that's a waste of money, and he calls it a waste. And when he calls it a waste, Jesus, he corrects Judas on the spot. And he points out, he calls him out for his insincere motives. And he calls out his skewed priorities, and he reminds Judas of why he's there and what this mission is about. And he doesn't do it to shame Judas. He does it to redirect Judas. He does it to call him back, to get him back on track. But Judas resented it. In fact, according to Mark's gospel, that was the inciting incident. That was when, after that Judas went and found the high priest and planned the betrayal of Jesus. Look, the longer we live in life, we're bound to walk into and find ourselves under God's correction in some area of our life. The question is always, how do we respond to it when we're face to face with it? Like when you read something in the Bible that corrects the way you think or the way that you've been living. During a sermon you hear something, or when somebody, a spiritual leader, someone you trust in your life, calls out a blind spot in your life. Do you receive it? Do you grow from it? Do you resist it? Do you resent it? When we make a habit where we resent correction, what happens is we will invariably remove those voices from our life that disagree with us. You'll avoid reading those sections of the Bible. And maybe just stop reading it altogether. You'll stop going to that church. You'll only listen to preachers who say things that you already agree with. You'll reduce your circle of friends. You'll limit it to people who are like you. People who think like you and see things like you. And it's natural, it's human. Being corrected is never comfortable. It always creates a crossroad for us. You see, there's two postures that we can take in life, two kinds of people, if you will. There are those who need to be right and those who want to get it right. And if we're people who need to be right, then we will always resent anyone, even if it's God telling us that we're wrong. And we'll resist that correction and resent that correction that they try to bring. But if we're people who our main desire is to get it right, then we'll receive correction, even when it's uncomfortable, as the redirection we need, the help we need to get it right from that point forward. Look, your failure doesn't have to be final. It can be formational when we embrace the discomfort of correction and grow from it. Resenting correction, well, that only moves us closer to failing disastrously. And it only gets worse if we take the next step Judas took, and that's to isolate yourself. Now, sometime between when Judas and Jesus were at this dinner with the woman pouring out the perfume and the Last Supper, we're talking about just days in between here, but somehow in between these 2 days, Judas is able to get away from the rest of the 12 disciples and go to the high priest and make this plot, and nobody suspects anything. John tells us that at the Last Supper, when Judas gets up and leaves the table and goes out into the night, nobody says anything. Nobody's even curious about it. In fact, in the other three Gospels, they don't even mention Judas leaving the table, as if nobody even noticed he was gone. In other words, Judas, he was one of the 12, but he had isolated himself. He was in the room, but he was disconnected. Judas, he had disconnected himself emotionally and spiritually long before he ever physically left. And being isolated from his community, from the other disciples, it made room for another voice. Isolation, we might say, it's where the devil enters the conversation. Listen, I'm going to say it. I'll continue to say it again and again until you're tired of hearing it, or really until every single person is in a community group or connected to a team here at Liberty. Isolation is not only unproductive, it's also dangerous to you. And I'm not trying to be dramatic. I've just seen it again and again, and I see it all the time. Isolation, that's that ground where your very real enemy, the enemy of your soul, the devil, begins to whisper deception, begins to whisper discouragement, ultimately destructive thoughts. Satan targets isolated believers specifically. And God knows this. That's why he's given us the church. The New Testament says, it describes the church, it says it's like a body. It's made up of all these parts, and all these parts are very different, but they all need each other to be able to be who they're meant to be. Not just so that we can show each other the way and keep each other on track, but also so that we can help each other up after we failed, after we've gone in the wrong direction. This is what James says in the New Testament. He says, if you know people who have wandered off from God's truth, don't write them off. Go after them. Get them back. The church is meant to be a community where people can have second and third and fourth and fifth and sixth chances. Get that. This is where you can find your second and third and fourth and fifth and sixth chance. This is where we need to have the open hearts and the open hands to give people the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, the seventh chance. And that's going to make church messy. But that's how stories of redemption get written. Now, when we isolate ourselves, we take a huge step towards failing disastrously. But the good news is that doesn't have to be final. We can always come back from isolation. No failure is final when we have somebody else to help us up. The greater danger comes when we keep moving on to the next step Judas took. And that's to reject the love of Jesus. At the table, when Jesus handed Judas that piece of bread and said, I know what you're up to, but I love you anyway. I still consider you my friend. Judas, he hardened his heart. And even when Judas leads the police to that garden where he sees Jesus to arrest him, Jesus still hasn't given up on him. Matthew, he tells us about the betrayal moment. He says, now the betrayer had arranged a signal with him. The one I kiss is the man. Arrest him. Going at once to Jesus, Judas said, greetings, Rabbi, and kissed him. And Jesus replied, do what you came for, friend. Jesus still calls him his friend. Look, this is the heart of the gospel. Jesus knows the absolute worst about us. He knows the darkest secrets you carry. He knows the things that you don't even want to admit to yourself. He knows how you're going to fail in the future, and yet he loves you unconditionally, irrationally, undeservedly. We don't deserve it, but it's not about what we deserve. It never has been. It's always been about who he is. The question for us is, what do we do with that kind of love? The gospel is good news for every person who finds themselves in Judas' story. So many people struggle with that kind of love. They reject that love. They think they've gone too far. They've done too much. They struggle to receive something they haven't earned. But I want to tell you, receiving God's undeserved love, it's the only way to be made right with God. It's the only way to find freedom and healing and forgiveness. The call of the gospel is not about you loving God enough. It's just simply accepting that he has already loved you enough. And the good news is that even if you have rejected God's love before, even if you struggle with it, that rejection doesn't have to be final. Because God will never reject anyone who turns to him, anyone who comes to him. He will always receive us no matter what we've done, no matter how far we've gone. Even your worst failure can be formational if it drives you toward that unconditional, irrational, undeserved love of God. Failure is never final. Unless we take the final step that Judas took, and that's to give up too soon. Matthew tells us that when Judas, who had betrayed him, saw that Jesus was condemned, he was seized with remorse and returned the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and the elders. I have sinned, he said, for I have betrayed innocent blood. What is that to us, they replied. That's your responsibility. So Judas threw the money into the temple and left. Then he went away and hanged himself. There are some really tough parts in the Bible. But I have to say, for me, this one bothers me more than any other. It's tragic because there's no redemption to it. And the worst of all, it didn't have to end this way. I mean, if we were making a list of all of Jesus' lousy friends, and he had a ton of them, I mean, like everyone other than John abandoned him before he got to the cross. But if we were making that list, even if we're going to put Judas at the top, right underneath him has to be Peter. I mean, Peter denied even knowing Jesus or being associated with him 3 times while Jesus was being beaten and tortured and mocked in this illegal court trial. But you know, the very first thing that's on Jesus' mind 3 days later when he raises from the dead is, hey, quick, go tell Peter I'm alive. I want to come see him. I believe that if Judas had just waited, I believe he would have been the first one on Jesus' mind after the resurrection. But Judas gave up too soon. And I get it. Nobody expected the resurrection, not even the best of his disciples. When Jesus was on the cross and he died, everybody thought that was the end. And I'm sure that Judas did too. I'm sure that Judas, he thought that his failure was final. But what if? What if he had held on? What if he had not given up? His whole story could be different. And look, this may be the one reason you're here today. This may be the one thing that God wants you to hear. There may be people in this room, maybe you, and you're ready to give up. Maybe you're ready to give up on a dream, give up on your marriage, give up on your fight for freedom, give up on your kids who've walked away from God. Maybe you're ready to give up on God, give up on faith. Maybe even you've been thinking about giving up on your life. Don't. Please, don't. Don't give up. Resurrection could just be days away. And I don't mean that in a theological way. I mean like literally in real life, real time terms. God brings dead things to life all the time. He will bring in new people. He will introduce new opportunities, new perspectives, new miracles into our lives that can change everything for us if we just don't give up. Sometimes the most spiritual thing that we can do is just to hold on. Sometimes that's the greatest act of faith, is just to wait and to see what God can do. It's not at all unlike him to do what we never expected, what we never saw coming, what he's never done before. Your story could completely change, so don't give up. You've never gone too far. You've never done too much that God can't bring you back. You can be forgiven. You can be free. You can be restored. You can be redeemed. Your failure doesn't have to be final. So I used to live upstate in Albany. And one of the best things about Albany is that it's kind of like the cross-section of the Northeast. 87 runs and 90 cross right there in Albany, and 87 runs north up to Montreal, and 87 down to New York City, and 90 over to Boston, where you can see the Yankees beat the Red Sox, and then over to Buffalo if you want to go there for some reason. I think we have a map. A child did this map, but that's it right there. So, to get home from the airport, you'll notice the icon for the airport. To get home from the airport to my house there in downtown Albany, what I used to do is I used to go 87 south and then go on 90 east. This is interesting to everyone, right? Everyone's interested in this? Both of those parts of the highway, 87 south from the airport and the 90 east to Albany, those were toll-free. So that was easy peasy. But sometimes I would just not be paying attention, daydreaming, and I would miss that exit to 90 east. And so then I would end up going on 87 south. But that part of 87 south, that's where the tolls kicked in. And it was fine. I mean, it took me about the same amount of time because I could then just take just one exit, take 87, and then go up to Albany. And it was all good, same amount of time. It just cost me a little bit more if I hadn't made the mistake. Annoying, not disastrous. But imagine now I'm in the car and I'm going down and I missed that exit, and Carrie's in the car with me. And I'm on 87 South, I'm paying the toll, and she says, "Why did you go this way?" And I could just say, it was a mistake. But what if instead I double down and I'm like, it wasn't a mistake, I defend myself, I just prefer paying tolls, I say. And she says, "Well, that doesn't make sense." And I say, "Well, your mom doesn't make sense." And now we're arguing, and then I miss the next exit. And I go past that exit, and now where I want to be is behind me. Now this is a bigger deal. Because the only way to get off now is still miles away. I'm going to have to get off the next exit and to turn around. And this is going to cost me more. But it's the only smart thing to do is to get off that exit and to turn around and head back the way I need to go to be where I want to be. Because what's the alternative? I just keep going? I'm going to keep going down that road. I'm on the wrong road. If I keep on going, it's just going to cost me more. It's going to take me. It's going to take me longer to get back to where I want to be. If I'm on the wrong road, I need to get off the wrong road to get back on the right road. The stupidest thing I could do is to stay on the wrong road. Especially if I keep on going, because look, if I keep on going down 87 South, I'm going to run into 95 South. And if I keep going down to 95 South, it's going to take me straight to hell. Some of you call it Florida, but it's the same thing. You get the point. Your life, your relationships, your walk with God, failure is going to put you on the wrong road. And yes, it'll always cost you something to get off that road and to turn around. But the sooner you will change the course, like today, the sooner you will change your course, the less it's going to cost you and the faster you'll get back to where you want to be. So I'm going to end rapid fire with 5 exits you can take to get off the wrong road that your failure has put you on and to find yourself in a new story of redemption. Number one is to receive the love of Jesus. It's the most important thing that you can do. The good news is that everyone who will turn to Jesus and to receive his love will find forgiveness for all of your failure. You will have a God-connected life. God's Spirit will come to live within you and to lead you on the right road in this life. It'd be like a weight lifted, breath of fresh air. Your soul will find peace, maybe for the first time. Number two, invite God to lead in your life. Jesus is not, he's both the Savior that every person needs. He's also the rightful leader of every person's life. In all of the plans you make, Solomon says, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Don't depend on your own understanding. Look, seek his will in all you do, and he'll show you the right road to take. Number three, stay open to redirection. Can we please beware of the bad habit of shutting out the voices who disagree with us? It's become normative in our culture. Your algorithms are actually helping you to do that. Instead, let's be people who determine to surround ourselves with the voices who agree with God, whether or not they agree with us. Read the Bible, the whole Bible, even the difficult parts. Give God your Sunday every Sunday. Invite spiritual leaders to speak into your life, to call out those blind spots. And look, sometimes that's gonna bring you into conflict with what you want. Sometimes it's gonna bring correction into your life, but that's how we grow. That's how we get it right. Number four, share life in community. Exit that deadly path of isolation. Make room for meaningful relationships in your life. Join a community group. Get on one of the volunteer teams here at Liberty. You were meant to follow Jesus in relationship with others. They help us up. And number five, never give up. You may have failed. I'm certain you have. You'll likely fail again. But you don't have to fail disastrously. God redeems stories that seem beyond repair. Don't quit before he's done in your life. Would you bow your heads? I want to do two things to end today. First of all, I want to invite you, if you're here in this place and you say, listen, I want to receive this undeserved love of Jesus. I admit that I failed. I've made mistakes. But I'm hearing what you're saying today. That Jesus has not written me off. He loves me and he welcomes me to turn to him. This morning, if you want to get right with God and receive his love, I want to pray for you. So that's you today. Would you just slip up your hand so I can pray for you? You say, yes, Jesus. Yes, 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 yes. 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 I want to get right with God. I want to receive your love. Anybody else before we move on? Just slip up your hand. I'll see it. You can put it back down. I'm going to pray, and I want to invite, if you raised your hand, to pray along with me, and I want to invite everybody who's in the house today to pray along with me as well. Jesus, thank you. I believe that you died for me. I believe you rose from the dead to give me a new kind of life. I put my trust in you. It's the Savior I need, the rightful leader of my life. I invite you, heal me, free me, help me to trust you and follow you. Thank you for your love. I receive it. Amen. Last thing, we're going to sing one more song. Before we do, I want to take a moment to invite you to find freedom in confession and assurance. So what we're going to do before we sing today, before we stand, I'm going to invite you just to bow your head. Just you and God. This is just you and Jesus. We We all have some sin to confess. We're just going to take 60 seconds. I'm going to invite you to confess sin, your wounds, your failures, your fears, your confusion. It's just you and God. Name it. Own it. Open your heart to receive God's love and forgiveness in this moment. Go ahead.